A wealthy white millionaire named Paul shocked his elite neighborhood by adopting 7 black girls, which made them laugh and doubt him. But years later, those same people were on their knees, begging for mercy. What impossible turn of events led them to this point of desperation? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Paul Blake looked out of his office window at the orange and pink skyline of the city as the sun went down. He ran his fingers along the silver frame of a picture on his desk. It was the last school picture of his sick daughter Mina. He still felt sad when he saw her sweet smile and eyes after 5 years. His huge loft apartment was getting too empty to live in these days. He walked by Mina's old room every night, but the door was always shut. It was like a shrine to memories that he didn't want to upset. Something strange had happened earlier that day at the Children's Hope foster home during a normal meeting about investments. During his walk of the facility, 7 girls, all sisters, caught his eye. In the courtyard, they were jumping rope, and their laughter could be heard through the brick walls. One couldn't have been more than 12 years old, and the youngest was only 5. Their situation is complicated, Mrs. Rodriguez, who ran the foster home, had said. Most families don't want all 7. We don't want to split them up, but... She left the sentence open-ended, and her face showed that she was worried. He now sat down in his leather chair and took the folder Mrs. Rodriguez had given him. There were 7 photos inside, each telling a story of a little girl who needed a home. He shook his hands as he put the pictures on his desk. He looked at a picture of his daughter and whispered, "What do you think about this, Mina? Would you want to share your dad's love with 7 sisters?" He was excited about the idea of having kids laugh in his empty house again, but he wasn't naive. He knew what they would have to deal with as a white guy adopting 7 black girls. The rumors that people said at charity events, the raised eyebrows at school events, and the bias that still existed in their society, which was meant to be progressive. Paul went back to his window and looked out. His reflection was mixed in with the city lights. He remembered how helpless he had felt as he watched Mina leave, even though he was rich and had a lot of ties. He could do this, though. Someone had to stand up for these girls and show them they were worthy of love and safety. At that very moment, his choice became clear. His heart had been empty for a long time and was ready to be filled with love for 7 children. He thought about how big his apartment was and how the quiet rooms were just waiting to be filled with laughing kids doing homework and reading stories before bed. Paul picked up the phone and called Mrs. Rodriguez. When she replied, his voice was steady and sure. He said, "I'd like to start the adoption process," his eyes fixed on the picture of Mina's smile. For all 7 girls? It made his heart feel better than it had in years. He knew the road ahead would be hard, with lots of papers, home studies, and changes to be made. Paul didn't expect to feel something new after losing Mina, but he did, hope. We have hope for a future where he can be a dad again and give 7 beautiful girls the home they deserve. Over the next few days, Paul checked the girls' rooms one last time in the morning sunlight that came in through the tall windows of his giant home. Each room was carefully set up with new clothes, bedding, and unique touches. Putting his hand on a pink blanket, he hoped he had picked things they would like. Paul's heart began to beat faster as the social worker's car pulled into the circle driveway. 7 girls came out with only a few things in their worn-out bags and small suitcases. He watched them from the window. Mary, the oldest, held the hand of the baby to keep it safe as they walked up the stone steps. Johnny opened the heavy wooden door before the bell could be rung. He said, "Welcome home," in a soft, warm voice. There were girls who couldn't look at him, and girls who were staring blankly at the crystal chandelier in the hall. "This is all yours?" Kira, 11, asked in a voice that was barely above a whisper. "No," Paul said with a smile. "Now it's ours. All of ours." The 5-year-old Tasha peeked out from behind Mary's leg. "Even the fancy lights?" "Even the fancy lights," Paul said with a laugh. "Would you like to see your rooms? Each of you has your own, but I made sure they are close to each other." The girls looked at each other with doubt. They had never had their own rooms before. Paul noticed that they stayed close together like a tight bunch of flowers as they climbed the grand staircase, their little hands running along the polished banister. Johnny stopped at the top of the stairs and said, "I know it will feel weird at first, but I want you to know something important." He got on his knees to see their faces. "This is more than just a place for you to stay. This is now your home and will always be your home." Little Jasmine, who is 6 years old, fidgeted with her backpack strap. "But what if we don't fit in here?" Paul's heart hurt when he heard the doubt in her words. He told them, "You already fit in perfectly, because this isn't about fitting in with a house or an area. It's about having a family. Family groups should stay together. In order to point to the hallway with doors, he stood up and spread his arms wide. So please feel welcome. You can jump on the beds if you want to. Put up signs. Put your shoes down in the hall. This is your place to be yourself. Mary took a small step forward while holding Tasha's hand. Are you sure? Everything. He answered, every word, and his eyes started to get wet. There's a lot we need to learn about each other, but we have time for it all. Because families grow together, that's what they do. The girls started to smile for real for the first time since they got there. Tasha even let go of Mary's hand and spun around in the long hallway with her hair swinging. The other girls started to loosen up, and their eyes lit up with interest as they looked around their new home. Ow, Paul said as he reached for the front door handle. Who wants to see their room first? As he climbed the path to the country club, the leaves crunched under his feet. The neighborhood barbecue was already in full swing at the club. He left the girls at home with their new teacher because he wanted to keep their schedules as normal as possible while he went to the event for a short time. Rich neighbors walked around on the well-kept yard, and even though they were wearing casual weekend clothes, they still had designer labels on them. As Paul walked up, he heard talks quiet down, but they started up again in whispers after he was gone. Every year, Margar Wellington asked him to her Christmas galas. When he waved, she became very interested in her phone. Tom Bradford, who played golf with him often, kept looking at his watch and rushing the other way. Johnny filled up his plate at the buffet, and he couldn't help but hear a talk from behind a nearby hedge. Did you hear about Paul Blake's latest investment? It was Richard Cooper's voice, and it was full of sarcasm. 7 of them. Can you picture it? 3 doors down from Paul lived Barbara Stevens. Well, he did always have a flair for the dramatic, she said. But what about this? This is really rude. My wife says he turned that lovely house into some kind of charity ward. Property values in the neighborhood are sure to drop, said another voice. Paul's hand got tighter around his paper plate, but he didn't move. He just listened. Richard went on, I guess he thinks he's some kind of savior. Taking in those poor, unlucky souls. What does he really expect? If you know what I mean, they're not really country club stuff. The small group laughed, which made Paul sick to his stomach. It's just a phase, Barbara said with confidence. Once he figures out what he's done, he'll send them back to where they came from. No matter how much money you put into it, a charity case is still a charity case. Richard also said yes, that. It doesn't matter how much money you have. More knowing laughs followed his statement. Paul put his plate down on the table next to him, still empty. No longer did the food taste good. He had known these people for years, eaten with them, and trusted them with his business. They were even worse than he thought they would be now that their true colors were showing. He almost ran into Elizabeth Chen, another neighbor, as he turned to leave. She quickly turned her eyes away and took a step back, as if being around him could make her dirty. He felt like the weight of judgment was making the walk to his car longer than normal. He was followed by whispers that carried bits of words like midlife crisis and publicity stunt on the fall breeze. Johnny stood higher when he got to his car, though. He thought, let them talk. Let them decide. The 7 precious lives waiting for him at home were more important than what they thought. His girls were not a burden, they were his family, and he would do anything to keep these people away from them. Paul thought it was time to introduce his daughters to the neighborhood the following weekend. At the nearby park, the neighborhood's yearly fall festival was going on, with games, face painting, and decorating pumpkins. He thought that the laid-back, family-friendly atmosphere would make it easy to meet everyone. As they walked through the park's gate, Paul said in a soft voice, Remember, girls, you have every right to be here. Mary, who was 7 years old, held his right hand, while Jasmine, who was 6 years old, walked proudly on his left. Mary's younger sisters followed behind like ducklings. As they got closer, the happy mood seemed to fade. Parents quickly picked up their kids from the bounce house, saying they had to go use the bathroom or have a snack. The face painting stand got a taking a break sign all of a sudden when Sandra, 4, walked up to it. Mary whispered, Daddy, and pulled on his arm. Why is everyone looking at us funny? Johnny's heart hurt, but he kept his words calm. Sweetheart, some people just don't like meeting new people. Allow them time. They went to the pumpkin painting area, where some kids were still playing even though it was clear that their parents were upset. Michelle, who is 4 years old, picked up a small pumpkin. The bows and stickers on it made her eyes light up. A sharp voice said, I don't think those pumpkins are free. Victoria Hamilton, who was president of the neighborhood group, stood there with her arms crossed. They're $5 each, to maintain our community standards. Paul was sure that the pumpkins were part of the fair pass because they had already paid for it. He quietly said, "That's fine," and reached for his wallet. "We'll take 7. Victoria pursed her lips. This community has rules that help keep property prices and quality of life high. Mr. Blake, I hope you understand what those rules are. It's possible that your girls would feel safer at the downtown fall fair." He was very angry as he saw Michelle carefully put the pumpkin back in its place, her little shoulders sagging. His girls had already been turned down a lot when they were young. All he wanted to do was tell Victoria what he really thought of her standards. He knew that how he reacted would set an example for his girls, so he kept his cool. "Actually, Mrs. Hamilton," he said, his voice calm but firm, "my daughters and I are quite at ease here. We'll take those pumpkins now since we already paid the fee to get in." He didn't have to, but he did it anyway. He put 7 clean $5 bills on the table. "Do not throw away the change. You might feel better about those standards if you do that." He looked at his girls, who watched the conversation with hurt and confused looks on their faces. "All right, my loves. Let's put some pretty pumpkins on these and make them the most beautiful at the fair." The next week, Paul stood in his study with his phone in hand, finishing plans for the most expensive event of the season in the neighborhood. Everything about the welcome gala would be perfect, from the string quartet to the gourmet food to the beautiful decorations and professional photos. Everybody knew that his daughters earned the best, so he gave them it. "Are you sure about this, Daddy?" As Tasha asked from the hallway, she moved the bottom of her shirt around. "Maybe we shouldn't make such a big deal." Johnny put down his phone and went to talk to her. "You girls deserve to be happy. I want everyone to see you as the wonderful, beautiful young women you are, just like I do." The house was full of nervous and excited energy in the weeks before the gala. The girls picked out shoes, went dress shopping, and worked on their table manners. Paul hired etiquette teachers to help them feel better about themselves, even though he told them they were already perfect the way they were. "What if they still don't like us?" she asked one night as she danced in her new purple dress. Paul put her sparkly headband back in place and said, "Then that's their loss. But I believe that once they get to know you, they'll see what I see." When the gala day came, the house was filled with bright lights and lovely flowers that smelled great. Warm light from crystal chandeliers lit up the fancy table settings, and white roses draped the grand staircase, making it the perfect place for family pictures. While the girls were getting ready upstairs, Paul could hear them laughing and talking on the phone. They had hair and makeup artists come in to help them get ready, which made them feel like stars for the night. "You look beautiful," Paul told each daughter as she came out of her room. Tasha wore a deep blue dress, Tiana wore purple, Mary wore pink, Jasmine wore yellow, Sandra wore mint green, Michelle wore lavender, and little Kira wore white. They were a mix of beauty and class. "Are you nervous?" Mary asked as she looked at herself in the mirror in the hallway. Paul smiled and put a soft hand on her shoulder. "A little, but being nervous just means we care about something. I love you girls more than anything else in the world." Paul got his girls together in the grand foyer just as the first guests were about to arrive. They stood there as a family, a picture of hope and strength. The girls brushed out their dresses and did one last check of their hair. They were both excited and nervous. Paul looked at each of his girls and said, "Remember that you are now Blakes. Be proud of who you are and hold your heads high. Tonight isn't just a get-together with the neighbors, it's a family night." When the doorbell rang, 7 sets of eyes turned to hear it. Paul gave them all a smile that made them feel good. He was so proud of and loved his girls. No matter what happened tonight, the whole family would deal with it together. As the clock hit 7, the grand foyer filled with the soft sound of violins. Paul watched as his girls went down the beautiful staircase. The dresses on them flowed like soft waves of color. The caterers were moving quickly with silver trays of appetizers, and the warm light from the chandelier made the crystal glasses sparkle. 7:30 came and went. It was very dark in the huge hall, but the string quartet's music could be heard bouncing off the walls. Paul kept looking at his phone and saw a bunch of last-minute cancellations. An emergency meeting came up, and I forgot about it because I was sick and had plans earlier that day. Paul's sleeve was pulled by Tasha. "When are people coming, Daddy?" He told her, "Soon, sweetheart," even though it was clear he was lying. By 8 o'clock, there were only 3 couples there. The real estate agent from 2 streets over, Mrs. Henderson, barely touched her champagne before she said, "Well, this has been interesting, but we need to go." Her husband gave her a short nod. "Blake, you've put on quite a show here. A lot of drama." Jonathan saw Sandra's shoulders drop as they spoke. She had practiced her welcome for hours, hoping to make the neighbors like her. Next came the Wilsons, who said something about an early morning. The Petersons didn't even make an excuse, they just left when they thought no one was watching. Maybe we should have worn different dresses, Jasmine said to Mary in a low voice as she nervously smoothed her yellow dress. Michelle was the oldest and 15 years old. She tried to keep a brave face, but Paul could see tears in her eyes. She said in a soft voice, "We should have known this would happen. We don't belong here." Kira danced around the empty tables in her white dress. She was still too young to fully understand what was going on. She yelled, "Look at how pretty everything is," and her voice echoed through the empty room. As they stood there with their empty trays, the chefs looked at each other in a strange way. The string quartet kept playing, and their beautiful music showed how sad the family was. Johnny said, "I'm sorry, girls," and pulled them close. I hoped. Can we go upstairs now?" Tiana asked in a voice that was almost a whisper. "I don't want to be down here anymore." One by one, the girls climbed the stairs. Their perfectly styled hair and pretty dresses were painful reminders of the dreams that had been dashed. Paul's heart broke a little more with each slow step they took. "Will anyone ever accept us?" Mary asked as she stopped in the middle of the stairs. Her question was like a cloud of hurt and doubt in the air. The grand hall, which was decorated with such care and hope, was a shining reminder of how they were turned down. Crystal glasses caught the light, flowers gave off their sweet scent, and fancy place cards sat unused on empty tables. It all reminded them of how badly their neighbors had treated them. Paul woke up the next morning to find his girls at the breakfast table, their eyes sad as they moved their food around on their plates. The refusal the night before was still weighing on all of them. Johnny put down his coffee cup and said, "Girls, I need to tell you something important." 7 sets of eyes, some hurt and some hopeful, looked up at him. "What happened last night?" Paul took a moment to think about what to say. "That wasn't about us, it was about them. Their actions show what they can't do, not what you can do." Michelle, who was born first, shook her head. "But everyone thinks we don't belong here." He said, "Listen to me," in a soft but strong voice. "What other people think of you doesn't determine your worth. It's based on how you treat other people and how much love you have in your heart." "But school starts next week," Jasmine said in a low voice. "What if the kids there are just like the neighbors?" This was all Paul could think about all night. "Well, I've actually made up my mind. At least for now, I'd like to teach all of you at home." The girls looked at each other with shock. "Here?" Tiana looked around their large kitchen and asked. "Yes, right here," Paul said with a smile. "The library can be used as a classroom. We'll make our own little school by hiring the best teachers." "But what about making friends?" Mary asked out loud. Paul told them, "We'll find other ways. There are homeschool groups, sports teams, dance classes, places where you'll meet people who will appreciate you for who you are." The library turned into a bright, friendly school over the next few weeks. Paul put up a smartboard, hung a world map on one wall, and stocked the shelves with books and other school supplies. He hired experienced teachers who shared his goal of making the classroom a good place to learn. A little at a time, the girls got used to their new lives. In the afternoons, they would often be in the yard for science class or in the music room learning how to play instruments. Their mornings were full of lessons. Paul made sure to be there as much as possible, whether it was to help with chores or just cheer people on. Kira wrapped her little arms around Paul's neck one night as he put her to bed. "I love you, Daddy," she said in a low voice. Paul's heart beat faster. At that point, none of them had ever called him that before. He responded, "I love you too, sweetheart," his voice heavy with emotion. Late that week, he saw Michelle in the library helping Mary with her math homework. He felt happy seeing his daughters helping each other out and being at ease in their own home. "You know," Sandra said as she joined him in the doorway, "I was scared when you first said you were going to homeschool us. Now, though, it feels right, like we're a real family." Paul gently hugged her. "We are a family," he said, "and nothing anyone says or does can change that." For some reason, the tender moment drew the other girls to gather around them. As Paul stood there with his girls, he knew that even though they were having problems, they were building a beautiful home together, one full of love, acceptance, and understanding. Paul slowly became aware of the changes. His usual golf pals found that they were booked up for a while. Business dinner requests stopped coming in. It became hard to have even casual talks with neighbors. All that happened was stiff nods and forced smiles across perfectly mowed lawns. Paul felt an old pain in his chest as he watched Mrs. Henderson cross the street so she wouldn't have to go by his house in the morning. He had known these people for a long time and thought of some of them as close friends. But he shook his head and turned around to go back to his house. The music room was full of laughter. Inside, Mary was singing while Tiana played the piano and her fingers danced across the keys. The sight made him feel better. Paul hired the city's best music teacher, and Tiana learned to play the piano like it was her natural talent. He walked into the room and said, "That sounds beautiful. You're making wonderful progress." Michelle and Sandra were working on oil works in the art studio next door that he had built. Ms. Martinez, their art teacher, moved back and forth between them, giving them soft direction. Michelle had an unexpected skill for painting landscapes, while Sandra liked using color and feeling in abstract ways. "Look, Dad," Sandra called out while holding up her painting. He could see more and more happiness in her eyes, which the dancing colors seemed to show. Jasmine was working on soccer skills with their coach outside in the backyard. She found that she was naturally good at the sport, and with each practice, her speed and quickness got better. While she was waiting for her turn at gymnastics practice, Kira cheered her sister on from the stands. Tiana, the youngest, was sitting on the grass with her legs crossed and drawing the flowers in the yard. She used to be shy, but art therapy helped her get over it, and now she wore her sketchbook everywhere. Paul had turned their house into a place where people could be creative and grow. The basement got mirrors and bars and was turned into a dance school. There was exercise gear for every season in the garage. The girls often got together in an area of the library set aside for creative writing to share the stories they had written. At dinner that night, the table was loud and lively as each girl talked about what she had done that day. Tasha was good at playing a hard Mozart piece. In drills, Jasmine had scored 5 goals. Michelle's painting was chosen for a neighborhood show of young artists' work. Jasmine passed the salad bowl and said, "I didn't know I could do any of this before. We never got to try new things at the foster home." He answered with a smile, "Well, sometimes we don't know our skills until we're given the chance to find them." The girls across the table looked at each other with warm eyes. Through the things they did together, they became closer. They often went to each other's performances and art shows and celebrated each other's successes as if they were their own. Paul saw how his girls interacted with each other. Every day, their bonds grew stronger as they shared experiences and helped each other. The outside world may have turned its back on them, but inside these walls, they had made something much more valuable than being liked by other people. They had become a real family, bound together by love and the happiness of finding who they were as a group. Paul was in his study, and the fresh white envelope from the neighborhood association was on his black desk, lying open. Every word of the notice felt like a blow to his hands as he read it again. The polite words couldn't hide the ugly truth. They didn't want his family to live there because of the color of his girl's skin. "This notice is to let you know that many people have complained about your current living situation." The words were hard to understand because he was angry. Tears were in his eyes. They were playing basketball in the yard, and he could see them through the window. Their laughter filled his study, reminding him of all the things they had done to make it what it was. The thought of moving them again just as they were getting used to their new home made his stomach turn. Concerns about property values and breaking neighborhood rules were given in the notice. Paul was well aware of what those code words meant. He remembered all the times his girls had been treated unfairly in small ways, like having play dates canceled or being stared at or said something in a whisper. But this wasn't like that. This went right against their right to be in that place. Paul thought about Emily, his late daughter. She taught him that love has no limits. He felt a rush of protective anger as he looked at the picture of his 7 girls on his desk. He loved these girls just as much as he loved Mina. The man picked up the phone and called his lawyer. "James, I need your help. The neighborhood group did something wrong." He was sure of himself and his voice was steady now. "They want us to leave because they say we're bringing down property values." When Paul heard what his lawyer had to say, he took out a legal pad and started writing down notes. He was determined to fight this with all the tools, contacts, and strength he had. It looked like the neighborhood group picked the wrong dad to scare. In the evening, when the girls got together for dinner, Paul noticed how relaxed they looked and how easily they moved around the house. Michelle helped Sandra with her homework at the bar while Tiana set the table. Mary hummed while she mixed the sauce for the pasta. No one could take their home away from them because it was theirs. Paul wiped his mouth out. "Girls, we need to talk about something." He thought it was important to be honest with his girls, even when it was hard. "We got a notice from the neighborhood group. They need us to move." There was an eerie silence after that. The tines of Tiana's fork hit her plate. Mary's humming stopped all of a sudden. 7 sets of hurt and scared eyes looked at him. "But this is our home," Sandra said in a low voice. He reached across the table and grabbed her hand. He was firm. "And it will stay our home? That's what I promise. We're not going anywhere. We are going to work together to win this." His eyes were fixed on each of his girls, and he made sure they knew it. "People will try to tell you that you don't belong somewhere, but they're wrong. No matter where you choose to be, you belong there. We choose to be here. In the downtown office, Paul sat across from his lawyer, who was surrounded by huge stacks of court papers. They were going to sue the neighborhood association, which was more than just a legal war, it was a fight for his family's honor. James shook his glasses and said, "They're going to fight dirty. The group is well-funded and has strong ties to other groups." Paul agreed with a firm nod of his head. "Yes, I do. It doesn't matter what." When he got home that night, his girls were waiting for him in the living room. The oldest, Tiana, who is 15, stepped forward with a card she had made herself. Each girl wrote a message of love and support inside. The youngest, Sandra, had drawn a picture of their family in front of their house. There were stick people holding hands and a bright sun. "We're with you, Dad," Tiana said, even though her chin was shaking. He still got a little excited when he heard the word Dad. They had only been calling him that for a short time, but each time felt like a special treat. But as the weeks went by, it became clear how much the legal fight cost. It was all the time on Paul's phone with texts from business partners back out of deals. Many of his investment firm's customers were from the same elite groups as his neighbors, and they started moving their money to other places without anyone knowing. As he looked over his quickly falling portfolio one morning, Michelle found him in his study. In a soft voice, she told him, "I heard you up late again last night." Paul quickly shrunk the chart on his computer screen and tried to smile. "Just work stuff, honey. Is it because of the court case?" Michelle's sharp eyes saw that the lines on his face were getting deeper from worry. "Are we making things extra hard for you?" Johnny got up from his desk and gave her a tight hug. "Pay close attention," he said in a strong but soft voice. "I love you girls more than anything else in the world. It's all just stuff, money, work, what people think. But family is the most important thing." Later that week, at a family dinner, Mary saw Paul looking at his phone with a worried look on his face. "Did another client leave?" she asked in a low voice. After putting down the phone, Paul looked up at his girls and saw that they were upset. He told them, "Some people don't get what we're fighting for. They're picking a side, and that means they sometimes have to end our business relationships. But you're not giving up?" Kira said, not asked, with a proud tone in her voice. Paul reached for the bowl of mashed potatoes and said, "Never. We are going to show them that family is important and love is stronger than hate." His girls looked at each other. It was Jasmine who spoke up. "Hi, Dad. We've been talking. We wish to assist you." She took out a nicely written bank sheet. "We can cut back on our art classes and music lessons, and I can teach the younger ones basketball instead of going to private coaching." Paul's eyes filled with tears at their kind offer. These girls were ready to give up even more to help him fight for their right to be a family. They had already lost a lot before. Even though the lawsuit and money problems were making things harder, Paul got his girls together for their weekly family meeting. Their living room had bay windows that let in a lot of morning sun, which gave their circle a warm glow. Paul told the girls in a soft but strong voice, "Remember, we can't change how other people treat us, but we can change how we react." Tiana nodded as she thought about how people still looked at them funny at the grocery store. "But it's hard sometimes, Dad, the way they look at us." "I know, sweetheart." He put his hand on hers and squeezed it. "But being kind isn't about what other people deserve. It's about what kind of people we want to be." The girls thought about what their dad said. Sandra asked her sisters to help out at the local shelter for the poor, and they gladly agreed. They went to Hope Haven every Saturday morning ready to serve breakfast and sort gifts. At first, the other helpers didn't come close and talked quietly to each other. But as the weeks went by, the girls' true kindness and commitment started to show. Miss Patterson, who was in charge of the shelter's older residents, looked forward to their visits. "Those girls of yours have hearts of gold," she told Paul one morning as she watched them sort clothes to give away. The town heard about the girls' volunteer work. A short story with a picture of them serving food came out in the local paper. Some people in the town were touched by their desire to help others and began to treat them more kindly. For the girls to take to the shelter, Mrs. Henderson, who ran a flower shop downtown, started giving them fresh blooms. Mr. Chen, a neighborhood baker, would give away day-old pastries when he saw them. But these small wins didn't change how things were in their neighborhood as a whole. When they went for their weekly walks, the curtains still moved shut as they went by. Other families at the neighborhood pool were still packing up and leaving when Paul's daughters showed up. "Did you see Mrs. Roberts actually cross the street to avoid us yesterday?" Mary brought it up at dinner one night. "And Sandra can't play with the Peterson kids anymore," Michelle said in a low voice. Paul looked at his girls. Some of them were sad, some were mad, but none of them were defeated. Put down his fork and asked, "You know what makes me proudest? That even though all of this is going on, you girls still choose to help other people on the weekends? That's real strength." The girls looked at each other and took comfort in what their father had said and being with each other. They kept volunteering with a new sense of energy and enjoyed the real relationships they made at the shelter. There, with people who had also been through hard times, they found acceptance and thanks that their rich neighbors didn't seem to be able to give. At the Riverside food drive, Paul and his daughters removed boxes of canned goods from their van into the fall breeze that smelled like leaves. Volunteers from many nearby towns came to the event, which took place in the town of Mill Creek. Paul was so proud of his girls as he watched them organize the gifts with practiced ease. Their quiet morning was broken by the sound of familiar voices. "Well, look who's here, the charity collector and his collection." The insulting words came from their next-door neighbor, Mrs. Davidson. She stood with some women from their area who were all wearing expensive clothes that didn't look right at a food drive. "I guess you have to be everywhere when you're trying to make a point," said another woman with a sharp laugh. Sandra moved toward Paul's side. He put his hand on her shoulder to protect her and kept his words calm. "Keep putting those cans in order, honey. Thank you for your hard work." Paul could see the pain in the girls' eyes as they went on with their work. Mary's hands were shaking a little as she put the boxes of pasta in order, and Michelle's shoulders tightened up when the group laughed again. "I heard they're still fighting that suit," one of the women whispered on stage. "Maybe if they focused more on fitting in instead of making spectacles of themselves." Paul saw his oldest daughter, Tiana, straighten up and walk right past the group to get more boxes. Like he taught them, she held her head high. Paul softly called out, "Girls," and pulled them close. "Remember what we talked about? We let their words hurt us, not them." "But why do they have to be so mean, Daddy?" Sandra asked, her bottom lip trembling. Paul got down on his knees to look her in the eyes and said, "People are mean sometimes because they don't understand that being different can be beautiful. But take a look around. See all these people we're helping today? That's important. Your kindness makes you strong." The girls nodded, taking heart from what their dad had said. They went back to work with a renewed drive and sorted donations in a methodical way while helping elderly guests carry their boxes. "These go in the protein section," Tiana told her sisters, ignoring the neighbors' more amusing laughter. Michelle's voice got louder as she focused on the job at hand. "And these cereals go on the breakfast shelf," she added. Paul watched his girls work. Even though they kept muttering and looking sideways, their movements were steady and deliberate. They had learned to deal with problems in a classy way over the past few months, and they had grown a lot. Even now, when their neighbors didn't try very hard to hide how they felt, his girls decided to be kind and work hard at their jobs. "You're all doing great," Paul told them with love and happiness in his heart. "Don't let anyone turn down the light. Their opinion doesn't tell you how valuable you are." As the months turned into years, the girls all got taller. As Mary looked into Paul's home office one cool afternoon, he was sitting at his mahogany desk and going through a stack of client files that didn't match. "Dad, your filing system is?" she started, but couldn't think of a nice word. "Interesting." Paul laughed and ran his hand through his graying hair. "That is a nice way to say it. I've never been good at getting things in order." Mary walked into the office and looked around at the crowded shelves. "Maybe I can help. At the foster home, I used to put files in order." Johnny's eyes got bright. "What do you know? That would be great." Within a few days, Mary had turned his disorganized file system into something that was easier to handle. She asked her younger sister Michelle to help with charts and data entry because she was good with computers. Michelle opened her laptop and showed her dad the screen. "Look at this, Dad," she said. "I made a program that tracks all your client meetings automatically." Paul leaned forward and was amazed at how neat and clean the display was. "I can't believe this, sweetheart. That was easy for you to figure out, but it took me months to figure it out myself." Michelle, who is usually quiet and shy, showed that she could write great business emails. Paul told her, "Your messages are so much better than mine," after reading one of her pre-written replies to a client. Michelle was very happy. "I just pretend I'm writing to someone I really want to impress." Paul saw that his girls were different as the weeks went by. When they walked, their shoulders got straight. Their speech was more sure of itself. Even Sandra, the youngest at 5 years old, insisted on helping by putting bright labels on client folders. "We're like a real business team," Tiana said with awe in her voice one evening as they all worked together in the office. "We are a real business team," Paul said in a soft voice as he watched his girls work. While Tiana put together the day's mail, Michelle taught Mary some keyboard shortcuts. The younger girl sat next to a small table and carefully put the papers in order by color. Paul's chest felt warm. People had written these girls off, but they were showing that they were stronger than anyone thought. Because they were eager to learn and had natural skills, they gave his business new life. "What do you know?" Paul called out, getting their attention. "I believe it's time for this to become official. How would you all like to have real jobs in the business?" The girls were so excited that their faces lit up. Tiana straightened up in her chair. "Really? like real jobs. Paul confirmed, real jobs with real responsibility. You all have such great skills. It would be silly of me not to see that. Even little kids? Sandra asked with hope. Then Paul got down next to her chair. Everyone can bring something useful to the table. That's what makes a family business unique. Paul felt very happy when he saw the pride in their eyes. It wasn't just work to keep them busy. His girls were really talented, and they should have known it. It wasn't out of a sense of duty, they were investing in their own prospects and the success of his business. With a sparkle in his eyes, Paul gathered his girls in the conference room at work one morning. He put out some colorful craft tools on the clean table and said, "I've been thinking, what if we worked on something together?" The girls leaned in, interested. Paul told them about his plan for them to make gift boxes filled with handmade items, like candles that were poured by hand, soaps that were made with care, and treats that were beautifully wrapped. Paul smiled at his children and said, "Each of you has special skills. Amy and Sandra are so good at choosing color schemes. She is very good at art, Tiana. Mary's ability to keep things in order could help with making plans." The girls were excited to start the job. One of the mansion's empty rooms was turned into a workshop, with different areas for making each kind of product. Sandra and Amy spent hours picking out ribbon colors and making plans for the packages, while Tiana made pretty labels with her own art on them. "Hey, Dad." "Hey," Michelle called out one afternoon as she held up a lavender-scented candle she had just finished making. "I found a way to make the wax really smooth." The older girls were in charge of stock and keeping track of orders. The younger girls helped with easy jobs like putting things in baskets and tying ribbons. In the end, each girl found her own unique role. Other towns heard about the homemade goods they made. Orders began to come in, at first slowly and then steadily. A store owner from the next county came to their workshop and was amazed at how well their goods were made. The shop owner looked at one of their gift boxes and said, "These are absolutely beautiful. And you say these are made by your daughters?" Paul gave a proud nod. "My girls make each and every item with care." The owner of the boutique put a large order right then and there, and soon other stores did the same. The girls were so proud of their work when they saw it in store windows and heard great things from customers. "Look, Dad." "Wow," Mary yelled one morning as she showed Paul their sales numbers. "This month, our little project actually made money." Unexpected attention came their way when their handmade goods did well. A local newspaper wrote an article about their family business that talked about how the girls had used their imagination to make it a successful business. People from nearby towns started to see the Blake family in a new way because of how hard they worked and how entrepreneurial they were. During their weekly business meeting, Paul told his girls, "You've all done something amazing. You made something amazing out of an idea." The girls looked at each other with pride. Not only were they helping their dad, but they were also making their own thing that showed everyone what they could do. Every order they filled and every good review they got made them feel better about themselves and their mission. Paul was proud to see his girls working together in the workshop they had just turned into a home. The room was once empty, but now it was full of creative energy as each girl worked on her job. While Sandra and Tasha carefully chose pretty bows and boxes, Tiana drew pretty pictures for the labels on their goods. Sandra held up 2 silk bows next to a finished gift basket and said, "These colors will look great together. The cream and gold really dress up everything." The younger girls laughed as they carefully measured out the ingredients for bath salts and wrapped delicate soaps in tissue paper. Michelle, who is 5 years old and the youngest, helped by putting labels on finished gifts and sorting ribbons by color. Mary kept careful records of their stock and sales because she had always been good with numbers. "Dad, look," she yelled one afternoon as she showed Paul her well-kept chart. "Last week, we made enough to pay for everything we needed and still have money left over." Local shops quickly became interested in the handmade things they made. Mrs. Henderson, who ran a gift shop in the nearby town, went to their workshop and was blown away by how well their products were made. She looked at the carefully made baskets and said, "These gift baskets are absolutely exquisite. And to think that your daughters made them all?" The orders started coming in steadily. Each sister did what she was best at, and the girls came up with a smooth production method. Everything they made, from scented candles to handmade soaps, was done with great care and attention to detail. The success of their business brought them good notice that they didn't expect. A short article in the local paper praised their willingness to take risks, and people from nearby towns started looking for their goods in particular. One customer said, "My sister told me about your family's gift baskets. She said they are the most beautiful things she has ever seen." Paul saw how the project had changed his girls. When someone told them how great their work was, they stood taller, spoke with more confidence, and smiled with joy. What was even more important was that they had learned how to work together as a team, helping and supporting each other through every problem. When they were done with a big order one night, Tiana told her dad, "We did it. We did it." The other girls crowded around, and their faces lit up with pride and happiness. For weeks, Paul and his daughters got ready for the community center benefit. With the help of twinkling lights and artfully placed displays of their handmade goods, they turned the plain room into an elegant setting. The girls had practiced their talks a million times, and they spoke from the heart. Paul saw a mix of known and unfamiliar faces from nearby towns as people started to come in. He was so proud of his daughters as he watched them proudly greet guests and talk about their business. Mary was the first person to speak. At first, her speech was a little shaky, but with each word, it got stronger. "We were 7 scared girls in the foster care system before Mr. Blake took us in. He taught us what real love and acceptance are. Now we're a family." Sandra then told stories about how Paul taught them business skills and pushed them to be creative. She wiped her tears away and said, "Our dad believed in us when no one else would. He taught us that being nice beats being mean." People in the crowd paid close attention and wiped their eyes often. Even some of the neighbors who are usually cold-hearted were touched by how much the girls loved their dad. Tiana talked about their line of products and how Paul had helped them get better at what they did. "Every gift basket we make shows how much our family loves and cares for each other," she said with pride in her voice. Just as things were picking up speed and investors started to show interest, rumors started to spread through the crowd. Paul saw people looking at their phones, and the looks on their faces changed from concern to suspicion. "Are the things they say about him true?" One woman whispered to another. Someone else said in a whisper that Paul could hear, "I heard he's using those poor girls as cheap labor." Marcus Reynolds was in the back of the room showing a group of possible investors something on his phone. Marcus is Paul's main business rival. As they read what he was saying, their faces turned darker. Johnny's stomach dropped as he saw a few people quietly leave the place. The change in the mood hadn't been noticed yet by his girls, who were still on stage giving their business plan. But when the youngest, Michelle, stood up to say something, she was scared when she saw that the crowd was getting smaller. She began, "Our daddy," but her small voice was shaking as more people got up to leave. She got tears in her eyes as she looked at Paul with all her might. A circle of safety was made by the other girls around their little sister. Paul ran to the stage because seeing his girls hurt and confused faces broke his heart. He could hear the whispers getting louder and the false charges going around the rest of the crowd like wildfire. Someone said, "He's using them to get attention." "Those poor kids should not be in his care," said someone else. The mean comments and critical looks made the girls huddle closer to Paul. They were no longer sure of themselves like they had been before. What began as a chance to keep their family business going turned into another painful reminder of how unfair things were for them. The story spread quickly through their wealthy neighborhood. It seemed like every word got crazier than the last, turning Paul's act of love into something scary in the public eye. Folks who used to smile and wave now crossed the street to stay away from him and his girls. Someone in the coffee shop said to another, "Did you hear? He's making those girls work for free on his business," which was clear for everyone to hear. Someone else would say, "I heard he's just using them for tax breaks." The neighborhood group moved quickly to spread these rumors, which was scary. They made a number of official complaints, and each one was stronger than the last. In their most recent notice, they said they were worried about the safety of minors and the stability of the home. In the evening, Paul was in his home office going over the growing pile of papers from the association's complaints when he heard soft crying coming from the hallway. His oldest daughter, Sandra, was trying to comfort Michelle, who was crying into her hands. "Daddy, they're saying such mean things about you," Michelle said through her tears. "At the market today, Mrs. Peterson wouldn't let her daughter talk to me. She pulled her away like I was something bad." Paul took both girls into his arms, and his heart hurt. "Listen to me," he said softly. "People can say whatever they want, but we know the truth. We're a family, and that's what matters." The other girls came out of the hallway when they heard the noise. Soon, Paul's 7 daughters were all huddled around him, getting power from being with each other. "I heard them say they want to take us away from you," Tiana said, shaking her head. "They can't do that, can they?" Paul brought her up. "No one is taking you anywhere," he told them over and over. "We're going to face this together, just like we faced everything else." She is usually quiet, but Mary spoke up. "We can help you fight this, Dad. We'll show them what a real family looks like." The girls agreed and nodded, and their fear turned into purpose over time. Even though they were scared, they wouldn't let anyone separate them from their family. As the day went on, each daughter took a turn telling the other about the mean things they had heard and the little things that made them happy about being with each other. Paul didn't see his daughters as victims of their situations as he listened to them. He saw strong, tough young women who had already been through a lot. Even though the neighborhood was mean and the association made threats, they stuck together. Each problem they faced made their bond stronger. The girls didn't go to their different rooms as usual that night as they got ready for bed. They instead gathered in the family room with pillows and blankets to stay close to their dad and each other. Paul sat in his favorite couch and watched as his daughters got comfortable. Even though there was a storm outside, his daughters' faces were calm. Paul sat at his desk and read the latest batch of angry letters. His shoulders were heavy with stress. His face showed that he was stressed out from recent events. When his girls tried to help with the business, they were treated badly, and he couldn't stand it. He called them into his office. "Girls?" His voice was soft but strong. "I think it's best if you step back from the company for a while. The pressure is too much, and I want to protect you." The girls looked at each other, and then Sandra, the oldest, stepped forward. "Dad, we're not giving up. This isn't just about the business anymore." "Yeah," Michelle said, her voice strong even though she had just cried. "People are watching us. Other families like ours need to see that we won't back down." Tiana happily nodded. "Last week at the shelter, a little girl told me she wanted to be brave like us. We're making a difference, Dad." Paul was proud and amazed as he looked at his girls. Even though these young women had every reason to run away from the cruel world, they stood there in front of him determined. "We've been thinking," Mary said in a soft voice. "Instead of pulling back, maybe we should do more, show them who we really are." The girls talked about their plans. They wanted to do more charity work, plan more community service projects, and keep helping the business. They talked about how their appearance at local events had already given hope to other families who were going through the same things. Then Jasmine asked, "Remember Mrs. Thompson at the food bank? She cried when we helped her carry her groceries, even after her husband made those mean comments about us last month." Johnny felt tears coming to his eyes. His girls weren't just surviving the prejudice in their community, they were rising above it and using their pain to make a difference. They became symbols of hope for people who were also being treated unfairly or going through hard times. Sandra put her hand on his shoulder and said, "We're stronger together, Dad. And maybe, just maybe, if we keep showing up with kindness, things will change." When Paul looked at each of his girls' faces, he didn't see victims. He saw warriors of love and strength. They were right. Giving up now would send the wrong message to everyone who is following their family's trip. "Okay," he said, his voice heavy with feeling. "We'll keep going, together." The girls' dedication to helping their neighborhood became a daily example of how good they were. The 7 sisters would pick up trash on neighborhood streets every Saturday morning. Their uniform yellow vests could be seen from blocks away. From afar, Paul would watch with joy as his daughters worked hard, ignoring the mean looks from passing cars every once in a while. Their plan to clean up quickly grew. The girls invited other people to help them organize by setting up stations with trash cans, recycling bins, and trash bags. Many people from outside the neighborhood came to look around at first, but it started out as a small group. One morning, Mrs. Chen, who ran the nearby grocery store, said, "Look at how much cleaner Palmer Street looks now." She had been keeping an eye on the girls for weeks. "Those children have done more for this neighborhood than our association ever did." At first, the older girls helped the younger kids in the basement of the community center as part of a small tutoring program. Sandra, the oldest, found that she was naturally good at teaching math, and Michelle's patience made her great for helping students who were having trouble reading. After coaching, Mrs. Martinez told her friend in a whisper, "My Tommy's grades have improved so much. I was wrong about them. These girls, they're special." Small changes started to show up in the neighborhood over time. Some neighbors who had crossed the street to avoid the family before now gave them tentative waves. Some people even stopped to thank the girls for their hard work. On a rainy afternoon, Mr. Wilson, an old man from 3 houses down, shuffled into the community center while the girls were having lessons. He used to be one of their toughest critics, but now he just stood there and watched Mary help his grandson with his science homework. He whispered to Paul, "I've been watching what your family has been doing." Paul tightened up as he got closer. His grandson was clearly having trouble with his words as he paused. "He talks about your girls all the time. He says they make learning fun." Maybe I was too quick to judge. The support grew slowly, like little shoots breaking through tough ground. Mrs. Thompson from the garden club began putting fresh flowers at their door. The girls' favorite treat, chocolate chip cookies, were saved by the owner of a nearby diner every Friday. A group of moms from the nearby neighborhood came to one of the cleanup days with water bottles and meals for everyone. They worked with the girls and laughed and told stories together. Paul stood nearby and watched as some of his neighbors peered through their curtains. He saw that their looks were more interested than angry. Tiana called out, "Dad, look, one afternoon, referring to a small story in the local paper. It praised the girls' commitment to community work and showed a picture of them while they were tutoring. Even though it wasn't hot off the press, the article's positive tone changed how people in the community talked about their family. The change wasn't big or affecting everyone. A lot of people still stuck to their beliefs, but there was a clear change in the air. Supportive actions kept coming in small amounts, like dim lights flickering on in the dark. Each one made their little part of the world a little brighter. Tuesday morning was the day of the press meeting. It took place at the community center, where the girls had spent a lot of time tutoring. There were lots of local reporters in the small auditorium, and their cameras were clicking as the 7 sisters took their places behind the platform. Paul was sitting in the front row, and he was so proud that his eyes shone. Mary, who was the oldest, was the first to speak up. At first, her speech was a little shaky, but with each word, it got stronger. When our Father adopted us, we weren't just given a home. We were given hope. But that hope was tested every day by those who thought we didn't belong. Michelle then talked about the canal party and the mean whispers they had to deal with. She rubbed her eyes and said, "We could have let the hate make us mean. Instead, our Father taught us to respond with kindness and service." Each sister told their story one at a time. They talked about the cleanup runs, time spent tutoring, and small wins that kept them going. Some neighbors had slowly changed their minds, Sandra said. Tiana talked about the business skills they'd learned by working with their dad. A lot of people cried when Tasha talked about Paul. "Our daddy showed us that love doesn't see color. He fought for us when others wanted us gone. He taught us that real strength isn't about fighting back, it's about standing tall and helping others, even when they don't like you." Reporters leaned forward in their seats and scribbled quickly as the girls talked about how the neighborhood association tried to get them to leave, how the fundraiser was ruined, and how the business stopped supporting them. But instead of focusing on the problems, they talked about how they had grown stronger because of them. "We're not victims," Sandra said with confidence. "We're survivors who chose to thrive by lifting others up. Every piece of litter we picked up, every child we tutored, every smile we gave in return for a frown, these were our ways of showing that love is stronger than hate." The press meeting was all over the state's news. One newspaper said, "Family fights prejudice with service. 7 sisters show the power of perseverance," said someone else. TV stations showed clips of the girls' charity work during shows that aired after their powerful speeches. Paul saw how his girls handled interviews with class and poise, never getting angry about what happened. They talked about change, hope, and how important it is to stand as a family. Their message touched hearts and opened thoughts of people far beyond their neighborhood. Lots of letters of support came in from all over the country. People told the family about times they had been treated unfairly and praised their bravery. Each letter got a personal response from the girls, who used their newfound fame as another chance to show kindness. Paul and his girls kept up their daily routines of working hard and helping others no matter what. They kept up their charity work, ran their business honestly, and went into each day with the same determination that got them through the worst times. After many years, Paul was very proud to see his girls grow up and become successful young women. He put money into their schooling and health, and it paid off in ways he never thought possible. The big house that had seemed cold and unwelcoming to them before was now full of the energy of 7 busy workers. The oldest child, Mary, had graduated from medical school with high marks. She now worked as a doctor at the nearby children's hospital. Her kind personality and ability to understand kids made her very popular with them. The same drive that helped her deal with bias now helped her figure out what was wrong with hard cases. Michelle and Sandra both chose to become nurses because they were moved to do so by their time working at community health clinics. At the regional medical center, where they worked different shifts, their coworkers often said how kind and hardworking they were. If a patient was old, the sisters went out of their way to listen to their stories and make sure they were comfortable. Tiana found her calling in gathering groups of people. She turned the skills they learned as kids doing volunteer work into a job by creating programs that helped kids from poor families get to school supplies. The training program she started had spread across the whole county and now helps hundreds of families. Tasha became a social worker because she had been in the foster care system herself. Her specialty was helping kids find stable homes. She worked with vulnerable families with the same kindness and understanding that Paul had shown them. Kira and Jasmine, the younger girls, were still finishing school, but they were already doing well in the fields they had chosen. Kira was becoming a doctor like Mary, while Jasmine was finishing up her degree in business administration. Paul's early investments in homeschooling and private teachers built a strong base for them, but it was their own hard work and determination that got them through their more difficult classes. Despite Paul's claims that he could pay for everything, each daughter had worked part-time jobs to help pay for school. Even though their jobs were going well, the sisters stayed committed to helping others. They set up educational workshops, mentorship programs, and free health checks. Their career success gave their volunteer work more weight, which let them make lasting changes in the community that had turned them down before. Their friends saw the change and were interested. People who used to talk about them behind their backs now went to see them for medical care and professional help. The girls were kind to everyone, and they never let past hurts affect how they did their jobs. Paul's business had come back stronger, in part because his family had built a good name for themselves through service and success. He often sat in his study and looked at pictures of his daughters in their graduation gowns or work uniforms. He was amazed at how far they had come since the first days they lived with him when things were unsure. Each daughter's story of success added to the family's long history of sticking with things even when things get hard. Their acts, not their words, showed how valuable they were, becoming living examples of what hard work, education, and love for everyone can do. A very bad flu-like sickness spread through the town where the Blake family lived, upsetting their normal, calm ways of life. There were only a few cases at first, but they quickly turned into an outbreak. The emergency room at the nearby hospital was full, and doctors and nurses worked around the clock to treat everyone who came in. Mary saw how the illness affected the sick children in her town firsthand because she worked at the children's hospital. She took care of sick kids for hours on end, and her heart hurt for the worried parents in the waiting room. Michelle and Sandra's nursing shifts at the hospital went from 12 to 16 hours because more of their coworkers got sick. The Blake sisters didn't think twice about helping, even though they had been turned down before. They put together an emergency reaction team and turned part of Paul's house into a temporary hospital for extra patients. Tasha helped set up care for kids whose parents were in the hospital, and Tiana used her skills as a community organizer to get volunteers and materials to the right places. The girls of all ages helped out. Jasmine was in charge of making sure that supplies got to the right places, and Kira used her pre-med skills to help the medical staff. Paul helped them by letting them use his home and other resources to help the people who had turned their backs on them before. The sisters worked hard and treated everyone the same, even people who had been mean to them before. They saw past critics lying in hospital beds, weak and scared, and treated them with the same kindness they showed to all of their patients. Many of these friends changed how they thought about the family after seeing how kind the sisters were. The epidemic was especially bad in the wealthy neighborhood, where many old people who had been harsh on the family were affected. The sisters were extra careful with these patients and made sure they got the right care and treatment. They remembered Paul's lessons on how to deal with hate with kindness and used what they had learned in this time of need for the community. As the local hospitals hit their limit, Mary worked with the hospital administration to set up emergency procedures. Michelle and Sandra set up rotating jobs for nurses to keep them from getting too tired, and Tiana oversaw a group of volunteers who brought in supplies and checked on residents who were stuck at home. The town didn't have a lot of medical tools, but the Blake family's quick action and ability to organize things kept things from getting worse. Their temporary care center in the mansion was very helpful for the hospitals that were already overloaded, and their coordinated efforts helped make sure that no one in the community went without care during the crisis. Things went horribly wrong when dark clouds gathered over the town, bringing bad luck. Within hours, a violent storm lashed out with huge amounts of rain that quickly clogged up the drainage systems. The rising water made it impossible to drive on the roads, and the streets turned into fast-moving rivers. Thunder shook windows all over the neighborhood as lightning flashed across the sky. The storm got stronger until it blocked all entry to nearby towns and their medical facilities. The main roads were blocked by downed trees and other debris, and other ways were too dangerous to try because of the flooding. The sisters watched as their community became more and more cut off from each other through rain-stained windows in Paul's house, which had been turned into a medical center. The local hospital was already full, and there was no way to get seriously hurt people to hospitals in nearby towns. As fast as the water rose, fear spread through the town. Parents whose kids were sick were getting very worried, and seniors who had long-term illnesses were afraid they would run out of medicines they needed. The town's few medical supplies were running out quickly, and since they couldn't get help from outside the town, the situation looked very bad. During this time of trouble, the community's view of the Blake family changed in a big way. People who had once said mean things about them behind their backs now looked at Paul's girls with eyes filled with hope. Mary's knowledge of kids, Michelle and Sandra's nursing skills, and Kira's pre-med knowledge all of a sudden became the town's most valuable assets. The sisters quickly put together their answer. They turned more rooms in the mansion into hospital rooms for more patients, and when the power went out, Paul's backup generator kept the power going. There was a triage system set up by Mary in the Grand Hall, and Michelle and Sandra were getting their limited medical supplies ready to last as long as possible. People who used to cross the street to avoid the family now waded through floods to get to their door to help their sick family members. The sisters worked non-stop and showed kindness and care to everyone who came to them, no matter how they had been treated before. The sisters' knowledge was now being used by the local council members, who had previously backed the neighborhood association's efforts to get the family to leave. When Mrs. Patterson, who had been one of their harshest critics, showed up with her sick grandson, everyone saw the irony. Mrs. Patterson had tears in her eyes as Mary carefully checked on the boy. The storm kept getting worse, and the water kept rising. Emergency services were overworked, and the town could not get help from outside sources. As the community learned how bad things were, they understood that their very survival depended on the family they had worked so hard to avoid. In this dangerous situation, the Blake sisters were the only ones who could save the town. Their medical knowledge and caring care were the only things that stood between them and disaster. The storm kept hitting the town over and over again all night. A group of well-dressed people crowded under expensive umbrellas that didn't do much to protect them from the pouring rain outside of Paul's house. One of them was Richard Wellington III, who was head of the neighborhood association. His usually spotless suit was now wet and muddy. "Please, my wife's condition is getting worse," he begged, and his voice broke from stress. "We'll pay anything." Someone behind him bowed their head. Rich people in the area had laughed at the Blake family before. At the last minute, Mrs. Hartley changed her mind about going to the welcome gala, so she held on tight to her expensive handbag. Mr. Peterson, who had taken his money out of Paul's business, was shaking as he helped his old mother. A person in the crowd yelled, "Our private doctors can't get through the floods. Please help us." As they looked out the window, Mary and her sisters looked at each other inside. Seeing their old tormentors standing helpless in the rain made them feel a lot of different things. They were the same people who tried to kick them out of their house, made fun of them for being in the neighborhood, and thought they were just there to get help. Mrs. Wellington stepped forward, her diamond necklace shining in the lightning. "We have resources. Name your price, anything you want." The oldest sister, Michelle, opened the front door. The crowd pushed forward, but she put up her hand. She was firm. "We don't want your money. We never did." Rich people in the area went silent, and the only sound was the rain hitting their expensive umbrellas. Something seemed to click in their minds all at once. They didn't care about their bank accounts, their social standing, or their power in the community during this disaster. They were stuck and couldn't buy their way out of it. "Please," Mrs. Hartley said in a low voice, her face wet with tears. "We were wrong about you, so terribly wrong. We don't deserve your help, but we're begging for it anyway." Sandra, Michelle's sister, met her at the door. "We help everyone," she said, "not because you're asking, but because it's the right thing to do. That's what our father taught us." You could feel the crowd's relief, but it was mixed with shame as they walked into the foyer of the house. They were put in their place when they had to accept help from the family they had worked so hard to keep out. As they waited with other patients for the care that only Paul's daughters could give, their fashionable clothes and expensive jewelry seemed pointless. Mr. Wellington had done a lot to get the Blake family to leave. He sat quietly in a corner and watched the sisters help everyone who needed them. He told his wife in a low voice, "We didn't just judge them wrong. We failed to see what truly matters." The Blake sisters worked all night to turn the fancy home their father owned into an emergency clinic. They had been turned down at their welcome gala in the Grand Hall, which was now used as a makeshift ward. Over the rows of cots where patients rested, crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over them, no matter what their social standing or past behavior was. Together with Maria and Michelle, Jasmine used the satellite phone to talk to local emergency services and help treat the sick. When the other sisters went from patient to patient quickly, they were able to comfort and care for people who had earlier avoided them. "I can't believe how organized they are," Mrs. Peterson told her husband in a low voice as she watched the sisters work. "Remember when we thought they would bring down the neighborhood standards?" No one missed the irony. The community that had worked so hard to keep the Blake family out now relied on their kindness and knowledge more than ever. When the generator at the community center broke down, leaving several critically ill patients at risk, the sisters didn't think twice. "Bring them here," Michelle told them, her voice calm and sure. "We have backup power and plenty of space." As more people came to ask for help, the sisters stayed calm and treated everyone with the same kindness their dad had always shown. They remembered what Paul had said, being kind to others, even when they don't deserve it, is what makes you strong. Mrs. Wellington used to lead an effort to look into their adoption, but now she just helps move things from room to room. She told Sandra in a soft voice, "After everything we did, I don't know how you can be so nice to us." Before answering, Sandra changed the foreline on a patient. Then she added with a soft smile, "Dad taught us that being angry only hurts ourselves. This is what community is all about." Both the house and the community center were turned into emergency clinics, which showed more than just medical readiness. It showed how powerful it is to forget and care for others. The sisters worked very hard, and their deeds spoke louder than words about what it means to love your neighbor. As morning came, the younger sister, Mary, walked through the makeshift wards giving patients water and nice words. She stopped next to Mr. Wellington, who had once told them they had to move. Not only did his face show physical pain, but it also showed deep regret. He said, "Thank you," in a whisper. "Helly, your father raised you well, better than any of us raised our own children." With quiet pride, the sisters kept working, showing what Paul had taught them about getting past bias and picking love over anger. Their house, which used to be a source of trouble in the neighborhood, had become a lighthouse of healing and hope for everyone. The girls worked very carefully, like soldiers. Their months of helping at hospitals were now paying off in a big way. In the huge gardens surrounding the house, they set up organized triage stations inside weatherproof tents. Solar lights made it easy to find your way to each treatment area. Michelle calmly arranged the patients so that those with serious symptoms went to the red tent, those with mild symptoms to the yellow tent, and anyone in need of basic care to the green tent. She called out, and her voice was calm and steady. Paul sat in a chair near the door and greeted everyone who came in with a real smile. He insisted on being there and helping his girls in any way he could. "You taught them well," Dr. Stevens said when he got there to help. "They're more organized than some hospitals I've worked in." Paul was proud of his girls as they quickly moved from one station to the next. Sandra was in charge of the stock, Mary was in charge of the medicines, and the younger girls made sure that all of the patients had water and other basic needs. They worked well together, and their kindness was boundless. In the past, Mrs. Harrison had led several campaigns against the family. Now, Mary was taking good care of her. "I don't deserve your kindness," she said as tears filled her eyes. "Be kind to everyone," Mary said as she adjusted Mrs. Harrison's blanket. "That's what our dad taught us." People in the town were amazed as these young women, whom they had turned down before, worked non-stop all night. Even though Paul was weak, seeing him calm worried family members with words touched them deeply. His steadfast commitment to the community, even after years of being treated badly, said a lot about who he was. "Look at how they treat us," Mr. Wellington told his wife, his voice heavy with anger. "After everything we put them through, they're still here, helping without hesitation." Even as the crisis went on, the girls stayed calm and worked quickly. They set up shifts so that everyone could get enough rest, kept track of goods carefully, and treated every patient with respect and care. Paul's quiet strength inspired both his girls and the people of the town, and he was always there to cheer them on. People in the neighborhood could feel how their views had changed. There were whispers of disapproval before, but now there were whispers of respect. The people who had tried to kick the family out could now see for themselves how strong their family was and how deeply they cared about each other. "We were so wrong about them," Mrs. Peterson told her husband as they watched Jasmine take good care of their mother, who is very old. "So terribly wrong." As the number of sick people slowly went down, the effects of what Paul's family did were felt all over the community. The grounds of the house, which had been used as a medical emergency center, slowly went back to normal. But the people in the town's hearts changed for good. Mrs. Wellington, who used to be one of the family's toughest critics, came up to Paul while he was sitting on his porch one morning. She had shaky hands as she held a basket of hot-baked goods. She broke down in tears and said, "I don't know how to begin to apologize. Your daughters saved my Henry's life. They showed such kindness, such grace." Paul gave a warm smile. He said in a soft voice, "Those girls are amazing. They always have been." Changes like these happened all over the town. The neighborhood organization, which had worked so hard to get the family to leave, officially took back all of their complaints and apologized to everyone. The head of the association, Mr. Peterson, spoke to a large group of people at the community center. His voice was heavy with emotion. "We were blind," he said. "We let prejudice cloud our judgment and missed the opportunity to know an extraordinary family. Paul Blake and his daughters have taught us what true character looks like." The local newspaper had a front-page story called "Angels Among Us" with pictures of the kids working hard during the crisis. The story talked about not only their recent bravery, but also their years of community service and volunteer work, which many people had overlooked or written off before. People in the grocery store, coffee shop, and other places in the neighborhood now smile at and thank Paul's girls from the bottom of their hearts. Kids waved at them in the street, and old people blessed them as they went by. Before, people crossed the street to avoid them. Now, they crossed to meet them. It feels different now, Sandra told her sisters as they strolled through town one afternoon. Like we finally belong. The story of Paul Blake and his 7 daughters inspired people outside of their community with its lesson that love can win over hate. The family was asked to talk about their experiences by churches and social groups in the area. People were moved by their story and how the love of a father and the strength of his girls had changed not only their lives but also the lives of everyone in the community. Reverend Matthews told Paul after a Sunday service, "Your family makes us remember what's important. Love, forgiveness, and the courage to stand firm in both." The girls, who used to feel like outsiders, were now welcomed as important members of the community. People eagerly backed their business ventures, which did very well. When things were tough, they started making things by hand that people wanted. These things became symbols of hope and determination. As Paul watched these changes happen, he felt a quiet joy. He was finally seeing his girls get the acceptance they had always wanted. People used to make fun of their house, but now it's a sign of unity and change. The grand mansion, which had been the center of a scandal, was now a symbol of hope and healing for the whole town. John stood in front of a full room at the next town hall meeting, with his girls standing tall next to him. The air was filled with respect and thanks in the same place where mean whispers and cold shoulders had been heard before. But there was still work to be done. Paul, with a steady, clear voice, said, "This community has grown a lot, and we want to be a part of its future." People in the crowd felt relieved, and then they cheered. But Paul raised his hand to show that he wasn't done yet. "However," he said, "we have one condition. The neighborhood association leaders who targeted our family must step down. Their actions caused deep harm, and true healing requires accountability." The room went quiet. Mr. Peterson, Mrs. Blackwood, and Mr. Hamilton, the leaders of the group that led the campaign against Paul's family, moved around in their seats in a way that made them feel uncomfortable. As people in the neighborhood spoke up, they all agreed with Paul's request. Mrs. Wellington spoke first, her voice shaking with emotion. "These leaders tried to drive away the very people who saved our lives," she added. "They don't represent our values anymore." Others came after and told stories about how the group's biased acts had split the community. As more people in the area agreed with Paul's situation, the movement gained speed. A resident for a long time, Mr. Roberts, spoke up and said, "I move that we hold an immediate vote. All in favor of removing the current neighborhood association leadership, raise your hands." Hands went up all over the room. The count was very high, almost everyone agreed. There was no doubt about it, the community picked Paul's family over those who had tried to keep them out. He stood up, and his face turned red. He said in a stiff voice, "The community has spoken. We will tender our resignations effective immediately." The leaders of the group agreed and then got their things together and left the meeting room. "Did we do the right thing, Dad?" Paul's younger daughter asked him as they left. Paul put his hand on hers. "Sometimes, sweetheart, doing the right thing means standing up for what's just, even when it's difficult." People in the town went up to Paul and his daughters and told them they agreed with the choice. A lot of people said they were sorry they didn't speak up sooner and promised to make the town more welcoming. On a bright Saturday morning, everyone in town met up in Central Park. There were rows of chairs on the grass, and colorful flags flew in the wind. The fact that almost everyone in the neighborhood came was moving for Paul and his 7 girls, who sat in the front row. As Mayor Thompson took the stage, her eyes lit up with emotion. "Today, we honor a family that taught us the true meaning of strength and forgiveness. When our community was at its worst, they showed us their best." People in the neighborhood came forward one by one to tell their stories. With tears in her eyes, Mrs. Chen talked about how Paul's oldest daughter had saved her mother during the epidemic. "You didn't just treat her illness, you sat with her, held her hand, and gave her hope." The neighborhood grocery store owner, Mr. Roberts, said that the younger girls had helped deliver food to elderly people during the crisis. "I watched these children, who we once shunned, work tirelessly to help others. They showed us what real character looks like." Little Tommy Jenkins, who is 10 years old, even took the mic. "When I was sick, the Blake sisters made me laugh with puppet shows while they gave me medicine. They're like angels." The mayor showed off a pretty metal plaque set on a stone base. The words were engraved on the surface. In honor of the Blake family, whose unwavering strength, boundless compassion, and dedication to our community taught us that love conquers all barriers. Their resilience in the face of adversity has forever changed our hearts and our town. His girls held on tight to each other as they read the note, tears running down their faces. As Paul put his arms around them, he couldn't help but cry at the attention on their trip. "This plaque," he said, "will stand in our town square as a permanent reminder of the family who showed us that true community means accepting and supporting one another, regardless of our differences." The cheers from the crowd could be heard all over the park as they stood up and applauded. Many of them had signs that said "Thank you, Blake family and love wins." People who had crossed the street to avoid them before now reached out to hug them. The family's example of being kind when things got tough had changed their hearts. Paul stood with his girls, their hands linked in a chain that couldn't be broken. They watched the group in front of them. When the sun hit the brass plaque in the morning, it shone like a flash of hope. In the park around them, people who had once looked down on them were now hugging, shaking hands, and saying sorry through tears. His oldest daughter, Mary, squeezed his hand. She told him in a whisper, "Look at how far we've come." The other girls smiled and nodded, their faces lit up with pride and happiness. Kira, his smallest child, put her arms around his waist, making Paul feel loved. He remembered the lonely times when they had to deal with mean looks and whispers, but those times seemed far away now, like clouds that had been pushed away by the warm light of acceptance. People in the neighborhood who used to slam doors in their faces now came up to them with homemade cookies and event invitation cards. Kids who were not allowed to play with his girls now rushed up to them, hugged them, and told them happy stories about their day. One of their toughest critics, Mrs. Peterson, walked up to them with tears in her eyes. "Your family changed this town," she said with a lot of feeling in her voice. "You showed us what real strength looks like." People were talking to each other and telling stories about how the Blake family had changed their lives in the town square. Some people talked about how hard the girls worked during the epidemic, while others talked about how Paul never lost his pride in the face of racism. The place that had seemed so unfriendly before now welcomed them with open arms. Paul looked at all of his daughters' faces. By going through hard times, they had grown stronger and more beautiful. They had gone from being scared foster kids to strong young women who knew what they were worth. It was more important that they had stayed kind even when others were mean, just like he had taught them. The people in the town came together to form a circle of unity where there had been division. On the grass, kids from all walks of life played together, and their laughter showed how things had changed. The walls that had once kept them apart had fallen down, and understanding and respect had taken their place. Paul and his girls realized they had done more than just accept each other as they stood there and watched their neighbors party and mix with each other. People in that community now knew what family really meant, one that went beyond blood ties and social standing and believed in the power of love and forgiveness. The neighborhood that used to be split up was now whole again, united around the family that it had tried to avoid. Paul and his girls were in the middle of it. They had gone from being laughed at to being respected. Their story will always be a part of the history of the town. If you enjoyed the story of Paul and his 7 daughters, I handpicked this next story that will touch your heart. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.